I went to law school, but I don't practice law, and I have great respect for people who do, because it's a tough business. Next speaker is Owen McShane, Chairman of the Policy Panel, New Zealand Climate Science Coalition, a activist group of if you know anything about New Zealanders, you got to admire they've got pluck. So, a guy with pluck.
Thank you. I want to dedicate this presentation to my friend and mentor from the days when I was at Berkeley, that's Aaron Waldowski, who really began to draw attention to these environmental scares when he wrote a book called But Is It True? And as he once said to me, and I think it's in the book too, he said that global warming is the mother of all scares. He explained, because if you accept the anthropogenic global warming theory, then there is not an area of activity in our lives which is immune to government intervention, taxation, and control. And he gave that warning many years ago. And I guess in my paper, which I've written and which you can access, of course, I do develop the President Klaus's theory that it really is all about freedom. In the short time I've got here, and the fact that I've got some pretty pictures, I'll sort of make that argument somewhat by metaphor. We are tending all the time to talk about the science and the theory and the statistics and about business and about the third world and so on, but you may not be aware of the impact of the fear of climate change literally on your own backyard. And I want to alert you to that, because often it's best to fight on your own territory. I mean, many of us here are concerned about the future costs that climate change policies may impose on the economies of the world, and it's easy to presume that these costs lie in the future. However, over the last 10 years, in many countries, including my own, the theory of anthropogenic global warming has been a major driver of urban planning policies, generally described as smart growth or growth management, which by constraining the supply of land have caused a massive escalation in house prices in those states, towns, counties, and countries where the theory has been applied. And my friends in Demographia have studied these events in the United Kingdom, and Ireland, and Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, and there's a clear correlation. Where the house prices have gone up, you've always got smart growth. The problem of housing unaffordability caused many bankers to enter the subprime lending market to help people get into the market. But of course, when the housing bubble burst last year, the subprime investors lost billions of dollars, and the loss of value and the loss of confidence in investment rapidly spread to countries like Australia and New Zealand that had also pursued these theories. Also, just recently, the cost of debt all around the world went up by 0.5%. So we don't have, in other words, if you like to take this phrase with you, every foreclosure you read about in the United States is as a result, mostly, of fear of climate change being used by urban planners in their housing markets. The New York Times is yet to make that connection. So we don't have to wait to see the costs of climate change alarmism. They're there, and they're all around us, and they're affecting you and your families and your friends and neighbors. So I'll just skip over all this theoretical work on freedom. The planners, you see, in 1972, the planning movement got very much caught up in the notion of sustainability, you know, the sustainable this, the sustainable that. Now, sustainability means carbon dioxide. That's the new code. Planners always talk in a code, and you have to learn that code. And a friend of mine, Randall O'Toole, was at a conference in San Francisco on sustainable housing and sustainable transport. These are the two favorite targets. Look out for it, they're coming to get you. And there were two Swedish researchers who had just done a survey of the whole world to find what they call the most sustainable city in the world, their model for urban development. And this was it, Halle New Start, the sustainable city. And already by this time, one of the measures was climate change. And it's in Germany. But Randall O'Toole at the end of the presentation said, well, I know Germany reasonably well. I don't know where the city is. And of course, it turns out it's in Eastern Germany. It was built in the communist regime. And so this is how the central planners want us to live, and they still do. And climate change is just the latest excuse. This sort of desire to have us all live in apartments and use public transport has been around since Le Corbusier's Radiant City, but none of us like it, so they always have to come up with a new excuse, and climate change is the latest one. And of course, you always hear this term, the vibrant town centre. Well, this is Halle New Start's vibrant town centre today. It was only vibrant under tyranny and poverty. As soon as the wall came down, a third of the people left within a year. They're tearing down most of these slabs. Some of them have been bought by private companies and turned into apartments. The 15-carriage trains now only carry 4 trains, and it really is dreadful. That's the most sustainable city in the world, according to research. And of course, this is what they all hate. It's called, they give it this name of sprawl, and I do recommend you read Robert Roigman's book about the origins of sprawl when the Roman aristocrats went out into the country to get out of the city. And as soon as the plebs started to move out, they got upset too, and that's been the story of urban growth ever since. And Frank Lloyd Wright, your own great architect, probably the greatest in the world in the 20th century, of course, he actually designed suburbs of very high merit, and naturally enough, we like them. But when we say we like them, the planners, they describe this as that we are addicted to the single-family home, and we're addicted to motor cars. These have become mental illnesses that they will cure us from. And yet they claim to be green. You see, they've got to always be in the environment. Well, I would ask them, if you're ever presented with these arguments, you're also in favour of biodiversity. Which is the better? This? These are from my friends in Australia. I would concede we don't have much flat land in New Zealand. Or this. The only garden you find there are what gardeners like me call rocks, sucks, and yucks. That's rocks, succulents, and yuccas. Or this. Now, of course, that is the dreadful suburbia. But survey after survey in every country says that is where you find the greatest biodiversity. And, of course, they also are always going out. Your own counties are probably doing this. We've got to buy a lot of open space. We've got to have more open space, and we're going to spend your dollars to buy it. But the open space, your backyard, is the most used and valued open space in the city. But they don't approve of that because it's private open space. It's only public open space which is good. Hence, you should live in an apartment and not enjoy your private space, but go and walk and stumble over the addicts and needles. Now, unfortunately, in transferring this data over here, I've lost the program which opens this pie graph. Now, I can assure you it wasn't distorted. It's a very simple pie graph from a book report called Consuming Australia. Because as I said, the smart growth planners now focus on transport and your house. And of course, you're always told that transport is a huge chunk of the carbon footprint of America, and hence you must give up your car and ride on public transport. Now, first thing, that is wrong. Public transport is less fuel efficient than your private motor car. I've got the data to prove that to you. All transport engineers know this. But the other thing is, in this pie chart of a household, this is where we're now looking at your household. It is the smallest sector on the graph. The standard household in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same here, including air travel, ferry travel, bus travel, train travel, and their car, is 10.5% of the carbon footprint. So if you all declared yourself frozen rigid because of your fear of climate change, it would only reduce your carbon footprint by 10.5%. Food, it's not on there, is 28%. So they'd be better to have us all go on Weight Watchers. The other thing, they presume that if you live in an apartment, you have a smaller carbon footprint than if you live out in dreadful suburbia. Wrong. The biggest carbon footprint is the family living in the inner city area, and the smallest carbon footprint is the family living in the suburbs. Now, I tell you this with some reliable faith because they set out to prove just the opposite. I do tend to believe research which upsets the people who did the research because they thought they were going to find the other answer. At least they published it. So I'm saying that they're going to use this movement to take away your freedoms to live and travel how and where you like. And you have to respond with the alternatives to take the fight on their own terms. New suburbs do not need to be rows of ticky-tacky boxes, although that famous suburb in the peninsula of South Africa is now a heritage area. And that's nice to know. Here's a new suburb. This is one that I was involved in near my own town. And just to bring it right to backyards, this is my own backyard. This is a development I've done with a park. There are 7 houses in here. This is the common land where the olive groves and the vineyards and the truffles are. It's my wife, and there's the wetlands. But you can't see the houses just by good design. That's my nice window seat. I'm very fond of it. Look at the detail of the couch and the sill. But imagine if that's 3 stories high, you fall out of it. And they say, oh, of course, you don't get any interaction in the suburbs. You have to live in apartments. Now, again, research shows that people who live in apartments have less interaction with their neighbours than people who live like us. This is the olive harvest. They will come and help us pick our olives. I give them some pizzas and some red wine, and they're all very happy. Now, the other thing is that the most sustainable house, to my mind, is the most adaptable house. Because to my mind, if we look at what life teaches us, evolution is about adaptability, adapting to change. And I bought this little cottage as a stopgap, but I've now fallen in love with it, and I was able to retrofit the solar heater. I was able to retrofit all of these decks and everything. This was a marijuana hydroponics shed, which I've turned into 3 offices and a sleep out. We'd just built these gardens, which now are growing vegetables, and now just in here there's a pizza oven. But there's another shed, and there's room for the boat, and all those different things that I want to do. There's nothing as adaptable as a house surrounded by a decent-sized piece of land. Try adapting a 5-story concrete tiny apartment, an apartment within a 5-story building. And the other way we adapt, I took this picture out by mistake. There's a picture at the bottom of the park of a jetty. Now, our environmental law makes it very difficult to build jetties. So when you look at it closely, you see it's not a jetty. It's a boat moored at both ends, which just happens to be very long and thin. And we'll all have to learn to do that sort of adaptation, where they write a rule and you just get around it. And of course, when people say you can't live near the beach because of rising seas, well, you can just do what the Dutch are doing. They now build houses that can float. And they hate it, of course, because it's a solution. But you don't need to think about future technology to address some of these things. We know how to do it already. My jetty rises and falls with the tide. But if the tides do get bigger, well, it'll just rise a bit more. Actually, where I live, the tectonic plate is rising faster than the sea level, as in most places in the world, by the way, so the sea is actually falling. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, I've got one minute. In here is a story about the carbon pencil, because they're all on about the carbon footprint. Some countries are now saying you have to provide a carbon footprint when you apply for a building permit. Well, I quote Reed's story of the pencil, where he shows that nobody knows how to make a pencil. There is not one person in the world that can make a pencil. Well, if we don't know how to make a pencil, how can we calculate the carbon footprint of a pencil? Because that needs even more knowledge. And if we do not know how to calculate the carbon footprint of the pencil that draws the building, how in God's name can we calculate the carbon footprint of the building? I know one group of people who love this idea. It's the lawyers, because if you say your carbon footprint is X, I can just change the system boundary and say, no, it's Y.